Amara walked through the hallways of Lincoln High School with her head held high, even though she felt the familiar weight of being different. At 16, she had learned to carry herself with quiet confidence, but it wasn't always easy being one of only a handful of black students in a school where most faces didn't look like hers. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows as she made her way to her favorite class, advanced physics. It was third period, and she always looked forward to it. Not just because she loved science, but because it was the one place where her mind could truly shine. While other students struggled with complex equations and theories, Amara found herself naturally understanding concepts that left her classmates scratching their heads. She pushed open the door to room 204 and smiled at Mr. Rodriguez, who was setting up his laptop for the day's lesson. He was one of the few teachers who really seemed to see her potential. Unlike some others who seemed surprised when she knew the answers, Mr. Rodriguez expected greatness from her. "Good morning, Amara," he said warmly. "Ready for today's lesson on electromagnetic waves?" "Always ready, Mr. Rodriguez," she replied, making her way to her usual spot in the third row, second seat from the left. She had claimed this seat on the very first day of school, and it had become her territory. From here, she had a perfect view of the whiteboard and could easily participate in class discussions without feeling like she was showing off too much. Amara pulled out her worn notebook, not because her family couldn't afford a new one, but because this particular notebook had become special to her. Its pages were filled with not just class notes but also her own theories and ideas about physics. Sometimes she would write down questions that popped into her head during lessons, questions that went way beyond what they were learning in high school. As other students began filing into the classroom, Amara noticed the usual patterns. The popular kids sat in the back, whispering about weekend parties and social media drama. The quiet students found seats along the walls where they could blend in. The overachievers positioned themselves in the front row, ready to impress the teacher with their eager participation. But Amara had found her perfect spot right in the middle of it all. Close enough to show she cared about learning, but not so close that she looked desperate for attention. From her seat, she could observe everyone while focusing on what really mattered, the lesson. Today felt different, though. There was a buzz of conversation that seemed more intense than usual. As she arranged her materials on her desk, she caught fragments of excited whispers around her. "Did you hear about the budget cuts? They're combining classes now. Some students are getting moved around." Amara tried not to eavesdrop, but it was hard to ignore the growing chatter. Budget cuts at Lincoln High had been in the news for months. Her mother had mentioned it at dinner just last week, worried about how it might affect the quality of education. But Amara hadn't thought much about how it might directly impact her daily routine. Mr. Rodriguez clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, class, I have an announcement before we begin today's lesson." The room fell quiet, and Amara noticed how everyone seemed to lean forward slightly, sensing that something important was coming. As you may have heard, the school district has had to make some adjustments due to budget constraints. Starting next week, we'll be combining our advanced physics section with Mrs. Peterson's section. This means we'll have about 10 new students joining our class. A few students groaned, probably worried about the class becoming more crowded. But Amara's first thought was different. She wondered if the new students would be as interested in physics as she was. Maybe there would be someone else who shared her passion for understanding how the universe worked. "I know this might feel disruptive," Mr. Rodriguez continued, "but I want you all to remember that learning is about adapting to new situations. Some of the brightest minds in science have had to work in challenging conditions. This is just another opportunity for all of us to grow." Amara smiled at this. She liked how Mr. Rodriguez always found ways to connect their classroom experiences to the bigger world of science and discovery. It was one of the reasons she respected him so much. As the lesson began, Amara lost herself in the fascinating world of electromagnetic radiation. Mr. Rodriguez explained how light waves traveled through space, and her mind immediately started making connections to things she had read about in science magazines. She found herself raising her hand frequently, asking questions that showed she was thinking well beyond the basic material. "Excellent question, Amara," Mr. Rodriguez said after she asked about how electromagnetic waves might behave differently in the presence of strong gravitational fields. "That's actually touching on some advanced concepts in theoretical physics. Have you been doing additional reading?" "I just like to understand how everything connects," she replied, feeling a warm glow of recognition. This was why she loved this class. Her curiosity was welcomed, not seen as showing off. But as she looked around the room, she noticed some of her classmates rolling their eyes or whispering to each other. She had gotten used to this reaction over the years. Some people seemed uncomfortable when she demonstrated her knowledge, as if her intelligence somehow threatened them. After class, as students packed up their belongings, Amara overheard a conversation that made her pause. "She always has to be the smartest person in the room," one student muttered to another. "I know, right? Like, we get it, you're smart. You don't have to prove it every single day." Amara pretended not to hear, but the words stung a little. She wasn't trying to show off. She was just genuinely excited about learning, but she had learned that not everyone appreciated her enthusiasm for academics. As she walked to her next class, Amara thought about the upcoming changes to her physics class. 10 new students meant 10 new personalities, 10 new attitudes about learning, and possibly 10 new people who might not understand her love for science. She had no way of knowing that among those new students would be someone who would challenge not just her comfortable routine, but her very sense of belonging in the classroom she had come to love. Someone who would mistake her quiet confidence for arrogance, her academic success for showing off, and her presence for something that needed to be put in its place. But for now, Amara walked through the hallways with the same quiet dignity she always carried, unaware that her biggest test wasn't going to come from any physics equation or scientific theory. It was going to come from a classmate who would judge her not by her character or her intellect, but by the color of her skin and the assumptions that came with it. The next week would bring changes that would test everything she believed about fairness, respect, and standing up for herself. But today, she was simply a 16-year-old girl who loved science and had found her place in room 204, third row, second seat from the left. Monday morning arrived with an unusual energy in the hallways of Lincoln High. Amara could feel the difference as soon as she stepped through the front doors. Students were clustering in small groups, whispering excitedly about the class changes that were taking effect today. Some seemed nervous about their new schedules, while others appeared thrilled about the possibility of being in classes with their friends. As Amara made her way toward room 204, she felt a mixture of curiosity and slight apprehension. Change had never been particularly difficult for her, but she had grown comfortable with the rhythm of her physics class. She knew where everyone sat, understood the classroom dynamics, and had found her groove with Mr. Rodriguez's teaching style. She arrived at the classroom a few minutes early, as was her habit, and was surprised to find it already buzzing with activity. Students she had never seen before were scattered throughout the room, some looking around uncertainly while others had already claimed desks and were chatting with friends who had apparently moved with them from Mrs. Peterson's section. Mr. Rodriguez stood at the front of the room, greeting the new students and trying to help everyone feel welcome. His usual calm demeanor seemed slightly strained as he managed the controlled chaos of combining two classes. Amara headed toward her usual seat, nodding politely to a few of the new faces she passed along the way. But as she approached the third row, she stopped short. Someone was already sitting in her seat. The girl looked to be about her age, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that clearly came from expensive stores. She had spread her designer backpack across the desk and was arranging her materials with the kind of casual confidence that suggested she was used to getting her way. When she looked up and saw Amara standing there, her blue eyes showed no recognition or concern. "Excuse me," Amara said politely, "but I think you're in my seat." The blonde girl looked at her with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Your seat? I don't see your name on it anywhere." "I've been sitting there since the beginning of the semester," Amara explained, keeping her voice level. "It's just where I always sit." "Well, things change," the girl replied with a shrug. "I'm Brooklyn, by the way, and I like this spot, so I think I'll stay here." Amara felt a flutter of irritation but forced herself to remain calm. She glanced around the room and noticed that several other students. Brooklyn's expression hardened slightly. "Are you seriously going to make a big deal about this? It's just a seat. Besides, maybe it's time you learned to be more flexible." She paused, then added with a slight smirk, "Some people think they own everything around here." The comment hit Amara like a small slap. There was something in Brooklyn's tone that suggested this wasn't really about the seat at all, But before she could respond, Mr. Rodriguez called for everyone's attention. "Good morning, everyone. I know we have some new faces in here today, so let's take a moment for introductions. Those of you joining us from Mrs. Peterson's section, please stand up and tell us your name and one thing you're hoping to learn in physics this semester." Amara reluctantly moved to an empty seat in the back corner, her mind still processing what had just happened. As she settled into the unfamiliar desk, she watched Brooklyn stand up with perfect posture and a bright smile. "Hi, everyone. I'm Brooklyn Pierce. My father is actually on the school board, so I've heard wonderful things about Mr. Rodriguez's teaching. I'm hoping to really excel in physics because I plan to major in engineering at Princeton, just like my older brother did." Several students murmured appreciatively, and Mr. Rodriguez nodded with approval. "That's great, Brooklyn. We're happy to have you here." As other new students introduced themselves, Amara tried to focus on their words, but she kept glancing toward the seat that had been hers for months. Brooklyn had arranged her materials with obvious satisfaction, occasionally looking back toward Amara with the expression that seemed almost challenging. When the introductions were finished and the lesson began, Amara found herself struggling to concentrate from her new position in the back corner. The angle was different, and she couldn't see the whiteboard as clearly. More importantly, she felt disconnected from the class discussion that she usually loved to participate in. Mr. Rodriguez began explaining concepts related to wave interference, and as usual, he asked questions to gauge the class's understanding. Amara knew the answers, but from her position in the back, she felt less inclined to raise her hand. It was as if Brooklyn's actions had somehow diminished her presence in the classroom. "Can anyone explain what happens when two waves of the same frequency meet?" Mr. Rodriguez asked. Brooklyn's hand shot up immediately. "They create an interference pattern. If they're in phase, you get constructive interference and a stronger wave. If they're out of phase, you get destructive interference and they cancel each other out." "Excellent, Brooklyn. You clearly have a strong foundation in wave theory." Amara felt a twist of frustration in her stomach. The answer was correct, but it was also basic, something any student who had done the reading would know. Yet Brooklyn was receiving praise for what Amara considered elementary knowledge. As the lesson continued, Brooklyn continued to dominate the discussion, answering questions with confidence and occasionally adding comments that showed she had clearly prepared for class. But Amara noticed that her answers, while correct, rarely went beyond the textbook explanations. When Mr. Rodriguez posed a more challenging question about how wave interference might apply to real-world technologies, Amara couldn't resist raising her hand, despite her position in the back. "Yes, Amara? Well, wave interference is actually the principle behind noise-canceling headphones. They use destructive interference to cancel out ambient sound waves, but it's also crucial in radio astronomy, where scientists have to account for interference patterns when they're trying to detect signals from space." Mr. Rodriguez's face lit up. "That's a fantastic connection, Amara. You're thinking like a real scientist, connecting classroom concepts to practical applications." Amara felt a small surge of satisfaction, but when she glanced toward the front of the room, she saw Brooklyn turning around to look at her with an expression that was definitely not friendly. There was something cold in her eyes, something that suggested Amara had just made herself a target. After class, as students packed up their belongings, Amara approached her old seat one more time. Brooklyn was taking her time putting away her materials, clearly in no hurry to leave. "Brooklyn," Amara said quietly, "I hope we can work something out about the seating arrangement. I'm not trying to be difficult, but that seat really does help me learn better." Brooklyn looked up at her with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know what, Amara? I think you'll do just fine wherever you sit. After all, if you're as smart as you seem to think you are, the seat shouldn't matter, right?" There was something poisonous in the way she said it, something that made Amara's cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. But before she could respond, Brooklyn gathered her expensive bag and walked away, leaving Amara standing alone by the desk that used to be hers. As Amara finally left the classroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger than a seating dispute had just begun. Brooklyn's behavior wasn't just about claiming territory in a new classroom. There had been something deliberate about it, something that felt personal even though they had just met. Walking to her next class, Amara replayed the interaction in her mind. She thought about Brooklyn's comments, her cold stare, and the way she had seemed to take pleasure in Amara's discomfort. Most troubling of all was the nagging suspicion that this confrontation had less to do with physics class seating arrangements and more to do with who belonged where, and who had the right to claim space in places where they might not be entirely welcome. But Amara had no idea that this was just the beginning. Brooklyn Pierce hadn't simply claimed a seat, she had declared war, and the battlefield was going to be every aspect of Amara's school experience that Brooklyn could possibly influence. The weeks that followed the seating incident felt like walking through a minefield for Amara. Brooklyn had made it clear that their conflict was far from over, and she seemed determined to make Amara's life as uncomfortable as possible without crossing any obvious lines that might get her in trouble. It started with small things. Brooklyn would arrive to physics class early and spread her belongings across multiple desks, making it impossible for Amara to sit anywhere near the front. She would loudly discuss weekend parties and social events, making sure Amara could hear about all the activities she wasn't invited to. When Amara answered questions in class, Brooklyn would roll her eyes dramatically or whisper comments to nearby students. "She's always trying so hard," Amara overheard Brooklyn say to her new friend Jessica one day. "It's like she thinks she has to prove something to everyone." The comment stung, but Amara tried to focus on what really mattered: her education. She reminded herself that she wasn't at school to make friends with people like Brooklyn. She was there to learn, to prepare for her future, and to pursue her passion for science. What Brooklyn didn't know, what nobody at Lincoln High knew, was that Amara had been living a double life all semester. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, instead of going straight home, she took 2 buses across town to the University of Chicago. There, in a cramped but well-equipped laboratory, she worked alongside graduate students and professors on research that could change the world. It had started 6 months earlier when Amara had attended a science fair at the university. She had approached Dr. Chen, a professor of materials science, with questions about renewable energy that were so thoughtful and advanced that he had assumed she was a college student. When he learned she was only 16 and still in high school, he had been amazed. "Your questions suggest you're thinking about problems that my graduate students struggle with," he had told her. "Would you be interested in joining our research team?" Amara had been stunned. "But I'm just a high school student." "Intelligence doesn't have an age limit," Dr. Chen had replied. "If you're willing to work hard and learn quickly, I'd like to see what you can contribute." Since then, Amara had been working on something extraordinary. The team was developing a new type of battery using quantum dots, tiny particles that could store energy more efficiently than anything currently available. While her classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, Amara was contributing to research that could revolutionize how the world stored and used renewable energy. The work was challenging beyond anything she had ever attempted. She spent hours reading scientific papers that made her head spin, learning about concepts that weren't taught in any high school curriculum. Some days she felt completely overwhelmed, but Dr. Chen and the graduate students were patient with her, explaining complex ideas until she understood them. "You have something special, Amara," Dr. Chen had told her just last week. "Your mind works differently. You see connections that others miss." The praise meant everything to her, especially as things at school became more difficult. Brooklyn's campaign of subtle harassment had escalated. She had somehow convinced several other students to exclude Amara from group projects when they had a choice. She made sure Amara knew about social gatherings she wasn't invited to. Worst of all, she had started making comments that had clear racial undertones. "Some people just don't fit in here," Brooklyn had said loudly in the hallway last Friday, looking directly at Amara. "They should probably find schools that are more appropriate for them." Amara had felt her face burn with anger and embarrassment, but she had forced herself to walk away. Getting into a confrontation with Brooklyn would only make things worse, and besides, she had more important things to focus on. That afternoon, as she sat in the university laboratory, carefully calibrating equipment for the quantum dot experiments, she tried to push the school drama out of her mind. Here, surrounded by people who valued intelligence and curiosity above social status, she felt like herself again. "How's the testing going, Amara?" asked David, one of the graduate students who had become her mentor. "I think I'm seeing some interesting patterns in the energy retention data," she replied, pulling up graphs on her computer screen. "Look at this. When we adjust the dot size by just 2 nanometers, the storage capacity increases by almost 15%. David leaned over to examine her work, his eyebrows rising with interest. That's remarkable. Have you shared this with Dr. Chen yet? I wanted to run a few more tests to make sure the data is consistent. Amara, if this holds up, this could be a major breakthrough. You might have found something that none of us thought to try. As Amara continued her analysis, she felt the familiar thrill of discovery that made all the challenges at school seem insignificant. This was where she belonged, in a world where ideas mattered more than popularity, where intelligence was celebrated rather than resented. Later that evening, as she rode the bus home through the darkening city, Amara thought about the strange duality of her life. At Lincoln High, she was an outsider, someone Brooklyn and her followers saw as a threat to be diminished. But at the university, she was a valued member of a research team, someone whose contributions were essential to potentially groundbreaking work. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through emails from Dr. Chen and other team members, discussing research protocols and sharing exciting new data. Hidden in her inbox was something else, something she hadn't told anyone about yet, not even her mother. 3 weeks ago, she had received an email that had made her hands shake with excitement and disbelief. The National Science Foundation had reviewed her research contributions and had selected her as one of only 12 high school students nationwide to present at the International Youth Science Symposium. The email sat in her inbox like a secret treasure, too precious and too unbelievable to share. The symposium would bring together young scientists from around the world, along with leading researchers and representatives from major universities. It was the kind of opportunity that could change her entire future, opening doors to the best colleges and research programs in the country. But Amara had decided to keep the invitation private until after the presentation. She had learned to be cautious about sharing her achievements, especially at school where her success seemed to make some people uncomfortable. Besides, she wanted to make sure she was absolutely ready before she told anyone about this incredible opportunity. As the bus pulled up to her stop, Amara gathered her belongings and prepared to return to her other life, the one where she was just another student trying to get through high school, where Brooklyn Pierce thought she had the power to determine who belonged and who didn't. What Brooklyn didn't understand was that Amara's worth wasn't determined by her approval or disapproval. While Brooklyn focused on social hierarchies and petty power games, Amara was quietly changing the world, one quantum dot experiment at a time. The irony was almost amusing. Brooklyn saw Amara as someone who needed to be put in her place, someone whose confidence needed to be crushed. But if she knew the truth about Amara's life outside of Lincoln High, if she knew about the groundbreaking research and the prestigious invitation sitting in Amara's email inbox, she would realize that she was trying to diminish someone whose achievements already far exceeded her own. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, and Amara had no idea that very soon, the two sides of her life were about to collide in a way that would change everything at Lincoln High forever. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday at Lincoln High, but by lunchtime, everything would change forever. Amara had no idea as she walked into first period that this would be the day her two worlds finally collided. Brooklyn had been particularly aggressive that week, seemingly frustrated that her campaign to isolate Amara wasn't working as well as she had hoped. Amara continued to excel in her classes. Her teachers still praised her insights, and she seemed unaffected by the social exclusion that Brooklyn had orchestrated. This only made Brooklyn more determined to find a way to truly hurt her. She acts like she's so much better than everyone else, Brooklyn complained to Jessica during lunch on Monday. Someone needs to knock her down a few pegs. What are you going to do? Jessica asked, though she looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. I don't know yet, but I'll think of something. People like her need to learn their place. But Brooklyn's plans became irrelevant when Mr. Rodriguez made an announcement that would shock everyone in advanced physics class. The day had started normally enough. Amara had taken her usual seat in the back corner, having given up on reclaiming her original spot weeks ago. Brooklyn sat in the front row, making sure everyone could see her designer outfit and perfectly styled hair. The class had settled in for what they assumed would be a typical lesson on thermodynamics, but instead of opening his textbook, Mr. Rodriguez stood at the front of the room with an unusual expression of excitement and pride. Before we begin today's lesson, I have a very special announcement, he said, his voice carrying a tone that made everyone look up from their notebooks. As you know, I believe strongly in recognizing academic excellence and celebrating the achievements of our students. Brooklyn straightened in her seat, assuming this recognition was meant for her. She had been making sure to participate actively in every class discussion, determined to establish herself as the top student in Mr. Rodriguez's eyes. This morning, I received some extraordinary news about one of our students, Mr. Rodriguez continued, news that I think demonstrates what can happen when natural talent meets hard work and dedication. He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the classroom until they landed on Amara in the back corner. She felt a flutter of anxiety, suddenly worried that somehow her secret life at the university had been discovered. Amara Thompson, Mr. Rodriguez said, his voice filled with unmistakable pride. Would you please come to the front of the class? Every head in the room turned toward her. Brooklyn's expression shifted from expectant confidence to confusion, and then to something approaching alarm. Amara felt her cheeks burn as she slowly stood and made her way to the front of the room, her mind racing with possibilities about what Mr. Rodriguez might have learned. Class, I want you to meet someone truly exceptional, Mr. Rodriguez announced. For the past 6 months while attending classes here at Lincoln High, Amara has also been conducting advanced research at the University of Chicago, working alongside graduate students and professors on groundbreaking renewable energy technology. The classroom erupted in whispers of amazement and disbelief. Even Amara was shocked that Mr. Rodriguez had discovered her secret. She later learned that Dr. Chen had called the school to arrange for her to miss classes during the upcoming symposium, and the conversation had revealed the extent of her involvement in university-level research. But Mr. Rodriguez wasn't finished with his revelations. Furthermore, he continued, his voice rising with excitement, Amara has been selected as one of only 12 high school students in the entire United States to present her research at the International Youth Science Symposium next week. She will be presenting her groundbreaking work on quantum dot energy storage to scientists and researchers from around the world. The silence in the room was deafening. Students sat with their mouths open, trying to process what they had just heard. Brooklyn's face had gone completely pale, her usual confident expression replaced by something that looked almost like shock. The research team Amara has been working with has made discoveries that could revolutionize how we store renewable energy, Mr. Rodriguez explained. And according to Dr. Chen, her professor at the university, many of the breakthrough insights have come directly from Amara's unique approach to the problem. Amara stood frozen at the front of the class, overwhelmed by having her secret life suddenly exposed to everyone. She had worked so hard to keep these two parts of her existence separate, and now they were crashing together in the most public way possible. I've also just learned, Mr. Rodriguez continued, that Channel 7 News wants to interview Amara tomorrow about her research and her upcoming presentation at the symposium. They're doing a special segment on young innovators who are changing the world. Brooklyn looked like she might be sick. The girl she had been tormenting for weeks, the student she had dismissed as someone who needed to learn her place, was actually the most accomplished person in the entire school. Not only was Amara conducting university-level research, but she was about to be featured on television as a young genius whose work could impact the entire world. Amara, would you be willing to tell the class a little bit about your research? Mr. Rodriguez asked gently. Amara found her voice, though it was shaky at first. Well, we're working on developing more efficient batteries using quantum dots. These are tiny particles that can store energy at the molecular level. The goal is to create batteries that can hold much more renewable energy for much longer periods, which could help solve some of the biggest challenges in transitioning away from fossil fuels. As she spoke, her confidence grew. This was her element, her passion, and despite the awkwardness of the situation, she couldn't help but feel excited about sharing her work. The breakthrough came when we realized that by adjusting the size of the quantum dots by just a few nanometers, we could increase energy storage capacity by up to 15%. It might not sound like much, but in terms of practical applications, this could mean electric cars that travel twice as far on a single charge, or solar panels that can power homes even during extended periods of cloudy weather. The class listened in stunned silence as Amara explained concepts that most of them couldn't even begin to understand. This was the same girl some of them had dismissed as a show-off. the same student Brooklyn had been treating as if she didn't belong in their classroom. When Amara finished her explanation, Mr. Rodriguez led the class in enthusiastic applause. "I hope this serves as inspiration to all of you," he said. "Amara has shown us that with dedication and curiosity, there are no limits to what young people can achieve." As students began asking Amara questions about her research and the upcoming symposium, Brooklyn sat in stunned silence. Everything she thought she knew about social hierarchies and who mattered at Lincoln High had just been turned upside down. The girl she had been bullying wasn't just smarter than her, she was operating on a completely different level. While Brooklyn had been focused on parties and social status, Amara had been quietly working on research that could change the world. While Brooklyn boasted about her plans to attend Princeton, Amara was already working with professors and graduate students, making discoveries that could revolutionize entire industries. As the bell rang and students began filing out of class, many stopped to congratulate Amara and ask more questions about her work. Brooklyn remained in her seat, watching as her former target was surrounded by admirers and well-wishers. For the first time in her life, Brooklyn Pierce realized that she had completely misjudged someone. Worse than that, she had spent weeks trying to diminish and humiliate a person whose accomplishments already far exceeded anything she had ever achieved. The shame was overwhelming, but it was mixed with something even more uncomfortable. The dawning realization that her assumptions about Amara had been based on nothing more than prejudice and jealousy. Amara finally made her way out of the classroom. Still surrounded by excited classmates, she glanced back at Brooklyn one last time. There was no triumph in her expression, no sense of revenge or satisfaction. Instead, there was something that looked almost like sympathy, as if she understood that Brooklyn was experiencing a very difficult moment of self-recognition. The tables had turned completely, but Amara took no joy in Brooklyn's obvious distress. She had never wanted this confrontation, had never sought to embarrass anyone. All she had ever wanted was to be left alone to pursue her education and her passion for science. But now that her secret was out, everything at Lincoln High was going to change, and both girls would have to figure out how to navigate this new reality. The days following Mr. Rodriguez's announcement passed in a blur of activity that transformed Amara's experience at Lincoln High completely. The local news interview had aired on Thursday evening, and by Friday morning, the entire school was buzzing with excitement about having a genuine young scientist in their midst. Students who had barely noticed Amara before suddenly wanted to talk to her about her research. Teachers stopped her in the hallways to congratulate her on her achievements. Even the principal, Dr. Martinez, had called her into his office to discuss how the school could better support students with exceptional academic interests. "We're incredibly proud of you, Amara," Dr. Martinez had said. "Your achievements reflect well on all of us here at Lincoln High. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can to nurture talents like yours." The attention was overwhelming but mostly positive. Amara found herself feeling more comfortable at school than she had in months. It was as if Mr. Rodriguez's revelation had given her permission to be fully herself, without worrying about standing out too much or making others uncomfortable with her intelligence. The news coverage had brought other unexpected benefits as well. 3 major universities had reached out to discuss scholarship opportunities. A local technology company had invited her to intern with their research and development team. Most exciting of all, the National Science Foundation had called to discuss expanding her research project and providing additional funding. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other students treated her. The respect in their voices when they spoke to her was genuine, not forced. They asked thoughtful questions about her work and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. For the first time since starting at Lincoln High, Amara felt like she truly belonged. However, one person remained conspicuously absent from all the congratulations and excitement. Brooklyn had become almost invisible since the revelation in physics class. She attended her classes but didn't participate in discussions. She avoided eye contact with Amara and seemed to shrink into herself. Whenever anyone mentioned the news coverage or the upcoming symposium, Amara noticed Brooklyn's withdrawal but wasn't sure how to interpret it. Part of her felt vindicated. After weeks of harassment and subtle cruelty, Brooklyn was finally experiencing some consequences for her behavior. But another part of Amara, the part that had always been empathetic even when others weren't kind to her, wondered if Brooklyn was struggling with more than just embarrassment. The answer came on the Tuesday afternoon after Amara returned from the symposium. The presentation had gone better than she could have imagined. Not only had she successfully presented her research to an international audience of scientists, but 3 different research teams had expressed interest in collaborating with her. The experience had been intimidating but ultimately exhilarating, confirming her belief that science was her true calling. She was walking through the school parking lot toward her mother's car, still wearing the professional blazer she had worn to present her research, when she heard someone call her name, Amara. Wait. She turned to see Brooklyn approaching, looking uncertain and uncomfortable. Gone was the confident, almost aggressive demeanor that had characterized all their previous interactions. Instead, Brooklyn seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "I wanted to talk to you," Brooklyn said, stopping a few feet away. "About everything that's happened." Amara waited, curious about what Brooklyn might say, but prepared for almost anything. "I owe you an apology," Brooklyn continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "A big one. The way I've treated you since I joined your physics class. It was wrong. Really wrong." This wasn't what Amara had expected. She had imagined that if Brooklyn ever acknowledged her behavior, it would be with defensive justifications or half-hearted excuses. But there was genuine remorse in Brooklyn's voice. "I was jealous," Brooklyn admitted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "From the very first day I could see how smart you were, how easily you understood things that I had to work hard to grasp. And instead of respecting that or trying to learn from you, I decided you were a threat." Amara remained silent, letting Brooklyn continue. "But it was worse than just jealousy," Brooklyn went on, her voice growing steadier as she forced herself to be honest. "I made assumptions about you that were racist. I'm ashamed to even admit it, but I looked at you and decided that you didn't belong in the same space as I did. I thought I had the right to put you in your place." The admission hung in the air between them. Amara appreciated Brooklyn's honesty, even though hearing it confirmed what she had suspected about the motivations behind the harassment. "When Mr. Rodriguez announced your achievements, I realized how completely wrong I had been," Brooklyn continued. "Not just wrong about your intelligence or your accomplishments, but wrong about everything. You weren't trying to show off or prove you were better than anyone else. You were just being yourself, pursuing your passion. And I tried to punish you for it." Brooklyn paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. "My father and I had a long conversation after seeing you on the news," she said. "He was disappointed in me, but more than that, he was ashamed. He reminded me that our family's success came from hard work and merit, and that trying to tear down someone else's achievements was the opposite of everything he had taught me." Amara finally spoke. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want to make it right, if that's possible," Brooklyn replied. "I know I can't take back the things I said or the way I made you feel, but I want you to know that I recognize how wrong I was, and I want to do better." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of weeks of conflict and misunderstanding hanging between them. "There is something you could do," Amara said thoughtfully. "Mr. Rodriguez mentioned that the school wants to start a program to help other students get involved in research opportunities. They need someone to help coordinate it, someone who's good at organizing and communicating with different groups of people." Brooklyn looked surprised. "You think I could do something like that?" "You're a natural leader," Amara said. "I've watched you in class. When you're not focused on tearing people down, you're actually really good at bringing people together. Maybe you could use those skills to help other students find opportunities to pursue their interests." It was an olive branch, and Brooklyn recognized it as such. More than that, it was a chance to transform her influence at Lincoln High from something destructive into something positive. "I'd like that," Brooklyn said softly. "I'd really like to help other students the way I should have been supporting you all along." Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened at Lincoln High. Brooklyn threw herself into the research mentorship program with the same determination she had once used to make Amara's life difficult. She reached out to local universities, businesses, and research institutions to create opportunities for students with academic interests that went beyond the standard curriculum. She also became one of Amara's strongest supporters, publicly praising her achievements and defending her when anyone suggested that her success was somehow undeserved. It was as if she was determined to make up for her previous behavior by being twice as supportive as she had once been hostile. The friendship that developed between them was unexpected, but genuine. Brooklyn learned to appreciate Amara's brilliance without feeling threatened by it, while Amara discovered that Brooklyn's leadership skills and social connections could be powerful forces for good when directed properly. By the end of the semester, the research mentorship program had connected 15 students with opportunities at local colleges and companies. 3 students had been accepted into competitive summer research programs, and 2 had received early admission offers from prestigious universities. Most importantly, the program had changed the culture at Lincoln High. Academic achievement was celebrated rather than resented. Students supported each other's successes rather than viewing them as threats. The school had become a place where intelligence and curiosity were valued alongside athletic and social accomplishments. On the last day of the semester, Amara and Brooklyn sat together in physics class, occupying adjacent seats in the 3rd row. Brooklyn had insisted that Amara reclaim her original seat, but Amara had suggested they sit together instead. "I've been thinking about what you said about assumptions," Brooklyn said, as they waited for class to begin, "about how dangerous it is to judge people based on what we think we know about them." "It's something we all do," Amara replied. "I made assumptions about you too at first." "What kind of assumptions?" "I thought you were just another privileged student who had never had to work for anything," Amara admitted. "But watching you build this mentorship program, seeing how hard you've worked to change things here at school, I realized I was wrong too," Brooklyn smiled. But it was a different kind of smile than Amara had seen from her before. It was genuine, without any of the calculating quality that had characterized her earlier expressions. "I guess we both learned something important," Brooklyn said. As Mr. Rodriguez began the day's lesson, Amara reflected on how much had changed since that first confrontation over a classroom seat. What had started as a conflict based on prejudice and misunderstanding had transformed into a friendship that was making their entire school a better place. She had learned that standing up for herself didn't require fighting back or seeking revenge. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty was simply continuing to be excellent, continuing to pursue your dreams, and being generous enough to offer forgiveness when it was genuinely sought. Brooklyn had learned something equally valuable, that true leadership meant lifting others up rather than tearing them down, and that her privilege and social influence were only meaningful if she used them to create opportunities for everyone to succeed. The seat in the 3rd row had become a symbol of something much larger than classroom seating arrangements. It represented belonging, respect, and the right of every student to pursue their dreams without having to overcome unnecessary barriers created by prejudice and fear. And in the end, there was room for everyone to belong, room for everyone to succeed, and room for everyone to learn from each other in ways that made them all better than they had been before.